Welcome to the Gnostic Rebellion. Today we're speaking with Dr. Joshua Pritikin, author of a wonderfully interesting book that deals with a core theme here at the Gnostic Rebellion and the Gnostic book that deals with I'm sorry, and the Gnostic Church of Light. Religion Unburdened by Belief is the name of the book. We'll introduce him in a moment, but you'll find immediately below this video, in the description, you'll find a link for our donation button at uh, PayPal, and this program supports the Gnostic Church of Light. It's an historic building, and we invite you to become part of our historic congregation. We're the first fully owned and operating Gnostic church on the continents of the Americas, and your donations are tax deductible. While you do that, we'll extend this blessing. May wisdom and divine providence increase the unique genius of our congregation and bring us to health, wealth, and increase of days. Okay. Having earned his PhD in psychometrics in quantitative psychology from the University of Virginia, Dr. Joshua Pritikin, during his academic career, contributed to 10 peer reviewed publications and now maintains a practice in White City, Oregon. He runs Estrella Counseling and holds a level 3 certification with the IFS Institute, which perhaps we'll talk about a little bit later. But it is his book, Religion Unburdened by Belief, that brings us here today.
Expected.
Yeah. Things can trigger your own memories, and I understand a little bit of how that process works, and how you bring that through both self-therapy and then you've had your own therapy sessions just for licensing, etc. So the process from both sides of the couch.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like I'm not a licensed therapist. I practice under like an alternative counseling law in Oregon. So it's like something very state specific.
Okay, yeah, but
anyway.
Great thing. Now, let's take this somewhere else, because I told you how I really enjoyed your attack on the New Age. I have a particular loathing for that business model that masquerades as a spiritual model. But it does help make some wonderful points on the authenticity of belief and versus inauthentic experience. And you go on, and it's a wonderful tongue-in-cheek thing, the Great Awakening tour. And your character, rhythmic disaster, I guess that was dancing, float tank fiasco, sleep deprivation experiment, sweat lodge social pressure. That one I love, because I've been to some of these sweat lodges going on pagan campus, and they all come out of there, and and they're all seeing Jesus as peepee. Uh, Mushroom misadventure, meditation marathon. I had a buddy, and both he and I, as teenagers and into college, got into Herman Hesse and the American Transcendentalist writers and this and that. And, we fancied ourselves spiritual. We were running poetry workshops and things like that. And one day he came visit me after I hadn't seen him in several years, and he was now up to meditating 5 hours a day. And I just I camped out. I just, you got to go, man. Kid, he's still living home with mommy and daddy. He's over 30 years old. He threw his furniture out of the dorm room at Boston University and came home and decided that he was the reincarnation of Jim Morris. After not having seen him for several years, he's knocking on the piano practice studio I was in at college. How did you know I was here? How did you know where in the college I was? And how did you find me in the middle of the night? And he wanted me to write songs for the new lyrics that he had written. He wanted me to write the music for it. So I humored him for a couple. Then I got to know some of his poetry, and it was really damn good. And So we became friends, but I never talked him out of his psychiatric situation. Now he's doing 5 hours a day, and that was psychiatric. Um, then, of course, something I talked about often, the guide gam, the abuse of the guru and the ego loser philosophy. So here's a belief: you got to lose your ego to become one with God. I believe that if I lose my ego, I will become one with God.
Okay, okay. I mean, so I guess the question is, what do you mean by ego? Like, we have to come back to definitions.
No, I wish deliberately not to define that because the teaching doesn't. And I'll explain to you why, because I'll reframe that after we get past this point.
Okay. So, like people, so you're saying like, how do we understand people that
A
feel
belief.
that,
I believe that if I lose my ego, I will become one with God. And I will
yeah.
teach others that if they lose their egos like I did, then they will become one with God also.
So I'm kind of sympathetic to that perspective because there is a interpretation of that that is resonates for me. Um, one thing we are as individuals is we by virtue of being an individual, you have this sense that there's a boundary between yourself and others, between what part of your experience is you and what part of your experience is not you. That's the you not you boundary. And
Right. Which that person will say is an illusion.
right, and when this boundary dissolves, then um, people people can have experience of touching a greater being, of being connected with something like a universal consciousness, or like um, something that's beyond the individual. And that
You can have that
experience,
peak experience.
it
Okay.
can be um, it can be a very have a lot of psychological impact, like that, to
It
have that
can. It
experience. And
can. Yes, it
yeah,
can. And of
yeah,
course, but that's a brief experience, not
right,
a permanent.
yeah, it has to be brief, otherwise you're dead.
Well, not just dead. You're the schizophrenic walking down the middle of the street, cursing at the sky, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because he
right, you're
lost his ego.
incoherent.
Yeah,
Sure.
he's got no ego anymore. He's got no sense of self-esteem, presence, anything.
Yeah,
Right? So, getting back to, we got to define now ego. The mystics in the Vedas didn't have the word ego. It's coined, near the end of the 19th century. You know what I'm saying? 5,000 years after some of this stuff was written. Um, you gotta recognize that they were talking about self. And yes, to get that peak experience, to step outside yourself for that brief moment can be truly a rewarding and deep spiritual experience. We call that crossing the abyss. Okay. Um, and that's great. But the ego loser philosophy, is one where the guru abuses the Kala. Because Guru's got a big ego. Kala's got to admire him and worship him. He lives in the facility. He's not going to be enlightened until the Guru tells him he's enlightened. In the meantime, he's got good 7 years of, cleaning the floors ahead of him before he even gets the first little degree of enlightenment. Right?
yeah,
Um,
there's plenty of stories like that. Yes.
yeah. So we have the problem of, uh, you know, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. No matter how noble it could be that I would take on a spiritual student, But if I start to get complete control of his life, it's not going to be long before he's signing over the deed to his house,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the problem with all of these new age philosophies is that they are dangerous, destructive beliefs.
Well, uh, so, but we can be more precise. You can say like a dangerous belief is autonomy erosion, or feeling like you're dependent on a guru for your self-development.
Well, we could destroy the person's self-esteem. Certainly in a cult, that's the first thing to get to work on. What they're experiencing as some spiritual insight is just the destruction of their self-esteem. So that eventually the cult leader will have them under complete control. They will begin to alienate them from outside contact, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean,
these are
that's
very
that's
common things, but I'm getting
like
at it different.
you're giving an
Um,
example of what happens when your autonomy is completely eroded, and that's a good example.
yeah.
Okay, but you wanted
So, but
to
now
change direction
here,
here.
the problems that induce that are the incorrect beliefs to begin with. I got to lose my ego. And the danger of that is because as I believe that and I start preaching it to other people, I get other people to lose their egos. And before you know it, we got a bunch of psychotics running around.
Okay, but I feel like you're pointing at two distinct things. Like oh, one thing is like as a aspirant, as a student, I might develop a dependency on a teacher. So that's one
Well, that
danger that
that's a
you're
psychological issue. I'm trying to stay in the realm of belief, religion
right. And
underneath by belief, and I'm
the other thing
pointing
you're
out
talking
a
about is
burdensome belief.
burdensome belief is that I need to um, destroy or leave my ego behind as a step in my self-development. That's the other. So there's two things. There's like dependency on teachers, and then this belief in that the ego is the obstacle.
Well, bracket out dependency on teachers. That's what I'm trying
Okay,
to say.
so let's just
Okay.
focus on the ego as the obstacle.
Focus on the ego, losing the ego as an incorrect belief. No, you don't have to lose your ego. The goal, reasonably set, would be to get to a point where you can experience something called transcendence of the self, where you can get that glimpse. Okay, and you'll find it a profound mystical experience when you have it. And maybe I can help you to do that, not as a guru, but as a teacher. I can do that in ways. Here's the techniques that some use, blah, blah, blah. You can try one of these or all of them to see what works for you. But
Okay.
the problem of belief, let's take it not just to individual psychosis, let's take it to mass psychosis, like we find in the Bible Belt today. And this incorrect belief is, on the verge of putting us into World War III if it hasn't already started. Okay, they're waiting for the rapture. They want Israel to bomb everybody so that Jesus will finally come, so that he'll kill all the Jews. And this is an ardent belief that's affecting our politics and running our country right now. Okay. Um, this is a burdensome belief. This is an incorrect belief that first helps us to understand that you don't have the right to believe in anything you want.
Well, yeah, it's not clear what evidence they use to justify such a strong conviction in that belief.
They're fundamentalist reading of the New Testament and the Old Testament, and cherry picking, but fundamentalist nevertheless. And they've built a philosophy that's extra biblical, right? The whole rapture thing is not represented in the Bible. It's a
Apocryphal.
contrived, yeah, it's apocryphal as far as Christians are concerned. If you ask, legitimate Protestants and Catholics about the American fundamentalist religion, they tell you it's not a true religion. It's not true Christianity at all. It's more than apocryphal. Uh, it doesn't belong with canon. It's not a true Christian religion. Okay, and I tend to agree with them. Not that I find any value in the Christian religion either. Um, and I find these incorrect beliefs to be dangerous. They create large cults. How many Muslims, how many Christians, how many Jews, how many Hindus, and the Hindus hate the white people as much as the white people hate the black people, which they think Hindus are, and blah, 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 blah. And so religion unburdened by belief has to remove supernatural belief. You talk about a scientific religious community.
Well, okay, but mm, like how do we get there from where we are now? That's um, that's a difficult question because like in my mind, people have freedom to choose, what to believe and with how much conviction. So
They have
that's
they
a,
have the legal freedom to choose what to believe, but they do not have the moral freedom.
yeah, I mean that, and they may or may not recognize that. So
Yes, and chances are they don't. Look at how big these idiot religions are. Oh my God, yeah, definitely.
so I mean, the audience for my book is for people who are beginning to recognize, like, are open to evaluating their beliefs. Like, if people are not open to that, then you can't really help them. So
Well, yes, good point. And your book gets the job done for somebody that's open to it. You know what I'm
okay.
saying? Uh, I think that people like with the little exercise that you just did with me. I think that people need to have that exercise done. I think that's the Gnostic dialogue, what we call the Gnostic dialogue. You could do it with yourself, and you should. You can do it simply by taking even starting with a religious line from a sacred text, or a silly line from a comic book, and just ruminating over it and ruminating over it, and until you start to bring meaning out for it. You begin to develop that inner dialogue. The next thing you know, you're writing your own red book. Because you've brought that out. And it might take a little longer starting with Batman comics, but maybe not. They were a psychological thriller. Um,
Okay, right.
uh,
And so I'm trying to do everything possible to support people's desire for self-exploration, for gaining self-knowledge. Um, I'm saying, like, if you have this, if you adopt this desire, then it like the outcome of that will um, help you flourish in life more than you are now. But it's still up to you whether you are open to choosing that.
well, yes, and obviously, the more real spiritual work you do, such as deconstructing the self, and putting it back together again in realistic ways, that's the work of transformation. That's the work of individuation.
Yeah.
Um, so when you unblend, it's the solve part of the formula, right? The solve et coagula, right? So you unblend, but naturally we blend things back together again in real situations. We just blend them back together again in ways that serve us instead of, you know, unserve. Um, I think this is the one where I wrote like one quote after the other quote, but it really appeared before. So I'll try to. I'm going to read them in the wrong order because I think I did that for a reason. 5.8.7. Growing up, our concept blends with ordinary consciousness. We have to start out that way, right? The entire self, is wrapped into the world. I'm hungry. Feed me. My diaper's wet. Getting a rash. Damn it! Come off those drugs. No, not a Freudian slip. Um, then you write. Or before that, you wrote, we rarely notice the assumptions shaping our awareness. And my note on the side of that is the cultural paradigm. Many of our assumptions are woven into the cultural paradigm and so are unconscious to us. Uh, Jung puts that in the land of the collective unconscious, and so in a lot of cases when he deals with the archetypes that appear there, so that we take on unconsciously roles. For us, unpacking, we're recognizing that, but for most of us, those roles, the woman on the job who always takes the big sister role because that's the archetype she embodies, and she's always doing big sister things with her fellow employees. You can see it in her, but she can't see it in herself. And we spoke about that a little bit last time. And then you got into state shifting. Uh, Talk about state shifting. This the different consciousnesses that we can inhabit, different roles in our lives.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for trying to set up this conversation for me. So the you started with like how as as infants growing up in a particular culture, we absorb many assumptions that are embedded in the culture that um, that uh, that seem like we're
That is so matter of fact that they're unnoticeable.
yeah, and so we don't even think to question the assumptions, but that like this tends to allow us to become identified with certain ideas. A good example, uh, like particularly relevant to what's happening today with artificial intelligence, is um, suddenly these chatbots, these AI chatbots, are exhibiting like a remarkable degree of intelligence, and that's calling into question whether we should identify ourselves as like I'm smart or I'm stupid, as opposed to I have a part of myself that's intelligent. Like it uh, it helps us recognize intelligence as separate from who we are, and that like intelligence is still important and valuable, but it
So is
doesn't
intelligence
define.
a state then? Because, I asked you kind of about state shifting. So is intelligence a state? Is my, are you referring to then maybe an intellectual state that I am experiencing right now?
I think it's more about like recognition that when when I ask you to look at who you are and describe who you see, and then we listed a bunch of parts, and then I asked each part to sit next to you, and then for you to look again at yourself and describe who you see as a way of trying to find PJ's who
So
PJ
was I
is. That's not a
state
part.
shifting? Was I state shifting in that, going through each of those parts, inhabiting different parts like that?
Well, I think we can just talk about it in terms of unblending. So you're these
Yeah.
instead of
And I'm asking is as we unblend and I get to these different parts that I begin to put my consciousness into, am I state shifting? Or I'm not state shifting because I wrote here talk about state shifting and I put state shifting in small quotes, so I assume that you used that phrase, state
mhm.
shifting. And my note to that was inhabiting the different roles in our lives while remaining unblended.
Yeah. Um, so the idea is that uh, um, like this aspiration to know thyself, to recognize who one is, like to what we need to do to realize that aspiration of knowing oneself is to unblend from all these identities that we're blended with. And so that's what I was um, facilitating in our session before, is helping you recognize some of those identities. And intelligence is another one of those identities. And um, so different experiences can help reveal assumptions that we hadn't noticed as assumptions. So, like what, for example, like artificial intelligence helps us recognize assumptions like I'm intelligent or I'm stupid, and unblend from those assumptions, like that we are
It helps bring up
we're,
substrata
we're
in our thought that is not serving us, and
or is
by
obscuring
making
who
us
we really
aware
are.
of it, we can correct the assumptions.
It's obscuring our core identity, which in our core identity is that we're a human being, um, and we have all these parts that we are um, tempted to blend with, like I'm intelligent or I'm stupid or I'm what were some of your parts? I feel inadequate um, or more recently, like I love playing with ideas. Uh, so like there's like these parts of ourselves aren't good or bad, but we need to recognize them as parts. That's important, because then we can notice our true identity, that is, you know, Joshua, who's not a part, and in
Well, now to
that's
say
like
true
the
identity, clarify that a little bit. There's no true identity underneath that is all knowing about me. Correct? I've been creating my identity as I've gone along all my life.
well, well, I just would like to make your terminology a little more precise. I feel like you're saying um, going through your life, you notice parts of yourself are revealed or develop, but what's
I
constant
see
is
many
that
aspects of today's identity, what I have of me, being forged over the years,
oh, yeah, for sure, yes.
pursuing things and getting experience of things. I thought, I was going to be the ultimate musician who saved the world, the next Jim Morrison and Patti Smith. I was there, and I wrote these landscape ideas into my music, and um, but that's not me anymore. But all those ideas and those landscapes that I built in are now coming in out in the metaphysics that I'm writing.
Okay.
And so I started writing on metaphysics, and I'm a metaphysical writer now. That's a different identity.
Okay. So you notice that um, some of the parts you developed as a musician are being repurposed in your spiritual expression, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that um,
Well, my identity evolved. I don't see
as
myself as a musician anymore, but I took the idea generator out of that. And what I was seeking to do mystically and magically in my musical compositions, um, uh, now I'm trying to do in my writing. And even so, there's a form after that, being this church innovator. So, I see those ideas evolving that even into innovation. Um, and so the ideas go through their own development, evolutionary development, and my personality has gone through an evolutionary development. You wouldn't even spoken to the guy who was 30 years old because I was an arrogant pig. I'm not so arrogant anymore, although I may still sound that way at times. Um,
okay, but the aspiration in the section 587, the self concept, is to try to isolate PJ who's not a part. So you keep when you're describing yourself, you're describing um, like a musician part or a mm, like the part of you now who enjoys talking about spirituality, and these are important parts of you. But like the idea of this section is to try to excavate, get down to the bedrock of who, what is what is the most fundamental part of yourself, which is that you're the protagonist of your own life, that you're conscious, and to try to understand those most fundamental characteristics of who you are.
well, yes, I am the protagonist of my own life. I am the creator of my own life. Started creating from the first time I chewed food and took a breath.
Yeah.
Um, right? So I've been creating myself all along, as have we all, and I am its protagonist. How do we get here again? Um, you were talking about this self as uh, unblended, as a true self. And I'm hearing that theosophical thing. You have to learn how to find your true self, and your true self knows everything. It's connected to the star, and you have one star through all your incarnations. And as soon as you finally connect with your true self, you'll know everything. You'll remember all your past lives, and and you'll see that you're even uglier than you thought. No. um, there's
So,
no true
like,
self.
are you asking like what's the payoff of identifying your true self? Is that what you're getting at, or
Well, no. To get to the core of one's being, I think is important. But I rue the phrase true self, because it's being used in theosophical and even in thelemic circles where I it's being used to imply this idea that's a part of you that already knows everything. You really wasted your time in school. All you had to do was connect with your true self. And, when you were Isaac Newton, you figured out calculus. Congratulations. Now you can remember everything about calculus that you ever needed to know.
I see. So there's like the a part of you that's the Akashic records or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Wonderful little
Okay,
excuse.
but
Everything's filed up there. You look for me under R.
Okay, but I would call
All
that a
the
part
time.
as well, right? So
Hmm?
like since we can
There's a
bracket
core
it that
self.
way.
There's a core self. This central ego um, gets built up from all of its parts. All those parts that you're taking apart and unblending. All those parts serve the ego, and the ego sits
Yes,
in the
yes.
center. Okay.
Okay,
And if the ego controls all those parts, the ego knows when and how and where to put those parts into balance in terms of the whole being. Um, when the ego is runaway and hyperinflated, it begins to pull into any one of those parts and just begins to blow up, right?
sure.
That rap star that got thrown in jail for all of his sexual perversion. Now that he can, he will. It's the old guy who finally made the $1 million and divorces his old wife to marry a young girl. It's those kinds of things that form dysfunctional behavior and rouse immaturity. That's the hyperinflated ego running into any one of those parts. Um, uh, the the ego itself being fed by all those parts um, does have its own intuition, does have its own desires and dreams and ambitions. And I know that I dream to give the ultimate sales report, and it's due at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Probably not the good night to do crack cocaine. um so if that's a part of my structure, I better choose not to do that one thing tonight.
Yeah,
um
and I think you're making a good point here because you're saying that uh, like a one of the fundamental desires of PJ who's not a part is for PJ's parts to be in harmony
yeah.
as much as possible.
Well, essentially that's the way I read the whole IFS construct here.
Sure.
You're
Yeah.
solve a coagula. So, um, I just wanted to be clear that the true self is a fictional character. Uh, you're constantly creating the self. As soon as you found a true self that you can create, you're already one step past it. You're one moment past it into the new self that because you're constantly amending that true self. It's
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
true self that sits underneath everything and knows everything already. Thank God we did IFS. I found it. I know now that, I always had dirty toenails. Uh, you know, it just doesn't
But
work
I
that way.
but PJ, I think what you're getting at is that um, we can define the true self through negation, through subtracting out parts of ourselves that develop that are that the ego is, all the components of our ego. If we subtract those out, then what we're left with is the true self, and the true self has like a couple desires, maybe that like one of the desires we identified is that it wants like a harmonious, like all the parts to be in harmony with each other.
There's essential elements that we could say go to a root soul.
Yeah,
There are more sophisticated elements that we build into onto that soul as we go through the experience of life and education and rumination, etc. So we have all that. And we find that the soul is something constantly in development. As a matter of fact, as soon as you stop trying to develop it, it starts to wither, right? Just like a muscle. Um, so there is all that. Um, and while we may have some basic motives that are part of that root soul, you know, some people, are just, you know, they're drawn to antagonism. They think as an antagonist. You know what I'm saying? And so they put
Well,
their
that
whole life
but hold
just
on,
in
that
the way they think. I'm just
that
creating a
sounds like
hypothetical.
they're frequently blended with a critical part.
Or that critical part is even an essential part of the nature that they've constructed into their soul.
Well,
In other words, the way the intuition functions is what I was trying to get to. Maybe I used a very poor example.
okay.
Okay, intuitions, inclinations, the way you're going to process the experience of your life, the things that you learn, and the ideas that you see. That's why we could both observe the same thing in life, and you're writing a paper on it, and I'm standing on a stage doing a comedy act, and we're both making the same point, right? So we have that. And you even talk as we get to the end of that chapter, we talk about triangulation, developing, state shifting, mastery. Um, uh, and you move into mental steering through the ingestion of substances and how substances can be used to unblend and to steer mentally. Um, there's other therapeutic effects that they can have, helping to alleviate temporarily certain inhibiting factors while you can explore and unpack other factors. I think all of that's great, and uh, starts to get beyond my own ability to probe essentially. Um, Besides saying, if I was king of the world, everybody should drop acid twice. But so moving as we do towards other issues that you came up with the drug ingestion, like for example, conviction amplification and the problem of religious doctrine. Love it. Okay. And this is kind of really what I'm getting at with false belief, because religious doctrine, when it's based on false belief, and if all the world's religions are false beliefs, which I love it in your book because you talk about the different ways ayahuasca, places where you can go, and there's all sorts of therapies, professional places you can go to, and stuff like that. Um, uh, One problem with religious doctrine that I noted, and maybe you noted it, Christianity and the splitting from the flesh, a problem with the idea of Cartesian dualism. And that is not just Cartesian dualism, because I think what Christianity is Aristotelian dualism. Plato said that we had this world of perfect forms, and this was the imperfect world.
Hmm.
Aristotle determined that this imperfect world must be evil, and that's the world of good. And from that, you get a whole bunch of religious doctrine before even Descartes comes along. Um,
Yeah, yeah. It's as soon as you start splitting things into good and evil, yeah, and then trying to exile the evil, then you're doing
but
psychological
that's
splitting, and it's
Manichaean dualism. That's Manichaean dualism. And that's of course what gets adopted because it fits so well with the Platonic dualism. Right.
hmm.
So they were able to merge all that together, talk about the idea of blended. That's super well blended, you know.